Good morning, Mr. Leong. It's 5 a.m. in the morning, and you're catching a flight at 9:30. In your various speeches in London, you have emphasized about Singapore being the only country that makes profit out of provision of public services, such as housing and the healthcare, and also making profit out of the CPF. Can you care to elaborate on that? Because for some, making a profit is always better than losing.
Well, if you're in business, of course, you are there to make profits and not losses. To answer your question, if you track the cash flows that come into the government versus the cash flows that go out from the government in respect of CPF, HDB, and healthcare, the inflows exceed the outflows every year. And thus, we are the only government in the world that, from a cash flow perspective, does not spend any money.
What is wrong with that?
There is nothing wrong with governments making money on various things, right? But there are no governments in the world that makes money from CPF, HDB or healthcare, or rather in most countries you would say it is healthcare, pensions and public housing. The problem in Singapore is this: the money that is made every year is accumulated in the reserves. And the reserves are now estimated to be about $1.3 trillion, which is the highest on a per capita basis reserves in the entire world. Now you keep accumulating reserves and the money is not going back to Singaporeans. Let's take some examples. Social welfare. Under ComCare, we pay out $131 million a year to 80,000 beneficiaries. So strictly speaking, on social welfare definition, if you compare to other developed countries, we have the lowest spending of social welfare on GDP against any other developed country in the world. So how is the so-called profits that the government makes every year going back to help the people?
The figure of 80,000 who are beneficiaries of the welfare, I presume that must be the poorest of the poor. Now, apart from the poorest of the poor, who else then you feel that should also be beneficiaries of the huge reserve?
Yes, precisely, because you are looking at 80,000 beneficiaries. They're like the bottom 10% of the population, right? The lower income and those living in poverty. We have something like almost 2+ million or 3 million citizens, right? So the bulk, as you put it, the squeezed middle class, of course, don't get social welfare, right? Then what do they get? Well, they get one of the most expensive public housing in the world. If you measure the ratio of price of HDB flats to income, we have one of the most expensive public housing in the world. And if you look at CPF, the contributions every year exceeds the withdrawals. And since the CPF is almost entirely our own contributions from our own income, if I may add, it is the highest pension contribution rate in the world at 37%. Not only is the government not spending any money on CPF, it makes money, a lot of money, because the returns derived from investing from our CPF versus the interest that is paid to Singaporeans. Nobody knows what the gap has been the last year or historically, but we estimate, let's say, the historical annualized returns derived from our CPF is conservatively 5%. And the government has never disclosed what is the weighted average return on all the CPF accounts. So let's say that's about 3.25%. And so you have a gap 5 minus 3.25, about 1.75% per year.
As a statistician and in all your speeches, you mention figures. Now, what does those figures meant to the middle class? What do they want?
Well, for a start, if you talk to most people, as you say, the squeezed, households, they will say, please stop increasing the prices of everything. Right? We just increase the price of water, increase the price of public transport, healthcare. Every month something is going up, right? And the problem when prices keep going up is incomes going up at the same time. Let me give you a startling statistic. In the last 10 years or so, the real increase in the median income of households, right, who live in HDB flats, is only about 1.5% real increase per annum in the last 10 years. Now let's take an example. If your household income is $1,000, that means a real increase of only $15 a year, or $150 in the whole 10 years. Now how do you survive in Singapore when your household income is so low and it's gone up in real terms by so little?
The counter argument typically of the Singapore government would be that either if you are going to increase spending, then pay more taxes.
Historically, we invariably have the highest budget surplus per capita in the whole world. The last financial year, the budget surplus was more than $2 billion. In the last 11 years or so, the reported budget surplus is more than $30 billion. And if you use IMF fiscal reporting guidelines, the cash budget surplus in the last 11 years or so is more than $200 billion, the highest in the world. So if you keep making money, and you can see from the budget surpluses, why is there a need to raise taxes? So this rhetoric that, in order to help people more, we have to raise taxes, is rubbish, it's nonsense. No, every month, there are a lot of people who are struggling to make ends meet. There was a study done by some professors at the university, and they found that about 30% of households actually have expenditure every month that exceeds their income. Now, can you imagine such a large segment of the population, right, literally struggling to make ends meet every month? Because if your expenditure is more than your income every month, then what are you doing? You are either borrowing money or you are, getting help from your friends or your relatives. It's a daily struggle, and 30% of households is an extremely high number.
I think that this is a contradiction where on the one hand government is making profit from money received, and on the other hand people could not make their ends meet.
Yes, if we are like any other government in the world, okay, you don't try to accumulate huge budget surpluses, almost every year, right? And you spend this money to help the people, then the cost of living will not be so high. Because if you don't spend money on healthcare, Singapore has one of the highest, what we call, a share of private to public spending on healthcare. The private share in Singapore of healthcare spending is about 60%. That means every dollar that is spent on healthcare, the government pays about 40 cents, and the citizens pay about 60 cents. But that 40 cents which the government pay, from a cash flow perspective, is actually not the government paying, because they're collecting more than 40 cents from the people every year.
In my various chats with Singaporean visiting London, I'm amazed is their concern about of healthcare, whereas say in the United Kingdom, I don't have a single worry.
Well, the fundamental reason is that the government doesn't spend any money on healthcare because the inflows exceed the outflows. Let's take some examples. See, our system is such that if you look at the National Health Insurance Scheme, which is MediShield Life, right, it's designed to cover part of your Class C and B2 hospitalization cost. Okay, but you see so many people who end up, as you put it, being so frightened because they see their friends literally becoming financially bankrupt, or I've seen people who actually sell their house in order to pay for healthcare. Now, why does this happen? Because let's take a typical situation. You fall sick, and so you go to see your private, GP at the clinic, and then he sends you to a public hospital. You cannot select the lowest C and B2 wards. Why? Because you're referred from a private clinic. Now, if you know, you should, if you can, leave the public hospital, go to the polyclinic and queue and get another referral letter, and then go back to the hospital. Then you can choose a C or a B2 ward. Now, many people have the misconception that, oh, never mind, I go to a higher ward B1, right? Then later on I can downgrade. But once you enter the system in a higher class ward like P1, when you want to downgrade, you have to go through means testing as well. Yeah. And this is the most startling statistic ever. There was one year when the question was asked in Parliament, what is the success rate of people who apply for downgrading from a higher class to lower class ward in a public hospital? The answer in Parliament was 1%. In other words, 99 or 100 people who, after entering a higher class ward and find that, hey, I can't afford it anymore, so can I downgrade? 99% of them fail. And now for so many years, as far as I know, nobody has ever asked this question, or the government has never disclosed this statistic again as to how many percent of those who apply for downgrading are successful. But that's not the point. Why should someone who's forced to go to a higher class one, because he came from a private clinic referral, be denied downgrading when he finds that he can't afford it?
I mean, it's not a secret that you intend to stand for elections. And would healthcare or universal healthcare, a stressless healthcare, be one of your policy statements?
Let me put it this way. The government does not need to spend any extra money on healthcare. It just have to firstly, stop making money from healthcare. Let me get down to the specifics. Your MediSave contributions in a year, plus the interest that goes into all your MediSave accounts, right, is about total $15 billion. Right? It's about 10 million contributions, 4 million plus interest, total 15 billion. If you look at the outflows, total government operating expenditure in a year is about 10 billion. Total withdrawals from CPF to pay for medical expenses and insurance premiums is about 4 billion. So you add the outflows together, 10 plus 4 is about 14. So you can see the inflows of about 15 billion actually exceeds the outflows about 14 billion. And so in a sense, the government actually is making, the only government in the world that makes money from healthcare of about $1 billion. Now of course, all this is estimation, right? Because the government is not transparent.
In other words, even without taking money from the reserve, just from the annual intake.
Yes.
If the government puts it back to the people, then that would resolve lots of the problem. Is that what you are saying?
Yes. The excess in the cash flows from healthcare, from HDB, from CPF, if it doesn't go to the coffers or the reserves and it goes back to the people, then the lives of ordinary citizens will be much better off.
Well, you have been repeating this point umpteen times in your writing, in your speeches. Has the government come back to challenge you on those figures?
Never. I have written a few thousand articles in the last 20 years. I have been quoted in the newspaper forum pages maybe about 500 times. I've done hundreds of speeches, scores of protest speeches at Howling Park. Not a single response from the government.
Now, you mentioned about the government spending on the 80,000 for the poor. How does that contrast with what the government spends on publicity? Good.
I guess you mean like, when you watch the television, you see a video sponsored by the government, or you see a poster out there on the roads. One year, when the question was asked in Parliament as to how much the government is spending on what they call advertising and public relations, or what generally people might say is propaganda, is $300 million. So can you imagine when you find a developed country that spends almost 3 times what they spend on their main social welfare scheme of Comcare. Comcare 131 million, 81,000. Propaganda 300 million. It's crazy, right?
But if propaganda is to make people feel better, wouldn't be a good thing?
Nothing wrong with making people feel better, right? If there's not, you don't have so many people who are suffering every day, right? I'm not saying that don't spend any money on propaganda, okay? Because you need to tell the people all the good things you are doing, but there must be balance. You cannot have propaganda spending that is 3 times your social welfare spending.
Now, the latest figure they are talking about is having 10 million to build for 10 million. Is it long-term good for Singapore?
Let's look at the statistics. We now have about 46% of the workforce being non-Singaporean. I'm not even counting the average of about 20,000 new citizens that are granted every year. We have almost about 40% of the population that is non-Singaporean, right? And if you keep growing the population, surely the growth is not going to come from fertility, because we have the second lowest total fertility rate in the world, right? And so it has to come from immigration. And if only 46% of your workforce is non-Singaporean and 40% of your population is non-Singaporean, and you increase the population from the 5+ million now to 10 million, what's going to happen in the future? There will be more non-Singaporeans in the workforce, more non-Singaporeans in the population than Singaporeans. And that's why if you look at statistics, it's very sad. Look at the latest one. The unemployment rate for Singaporeans has gone up, but the unemployment rate for PRs and foreigners has gone down, right? How can you have a situation where, you're not, arguably you're not looking after your citizens first?
And popularly Singaporeans are talking about Singapore for Singaporeans. Is there a degree of xenophobia here?
Well, if the statistics keep getting worse in terms of more non-Singaporeans in the workforce, more non-Singaporeans in the population, then I think you may be right, because people will be unhappy, right? We are the only developed country in the world whereby a foreigner can come as a tourist, apply for a job, and then stay when you get one. And that's why you find that the latest statistics show that the highest unemployment rate is for people who are aged 30 and below.
Right. Over here, some of the trade unions are arguing that there should be a living wage. With the living wage that which you apply also to foreign workers, then that is one way to force employer to be more productive, so that foreign workers do not come in as a cause for dampening wages.
The playing field is not level in Singapore. Let's look at the difference between a foreign worker and a Singaporean. Right? Foreign workers do not have to contribute to CPF, and therefore the employer saves up to 17% on the wages that he pays. So if you are an employer, would it be natural that, oh, why don't I employ a foreigner? I save 17% on the wage. Right? Now, if you are a female Singaporean, okay, or you get pregnant, okay, 4 months maternity leave. If I employ a foreign lady, if she's on a work permit, the conditions of the work permit says she cannot even get pregnant. And so as an employer, I don't have to worry about 4 months maternity leave. So the playing field is extremely unlevel, if there's a word like this, you know. And if you are male like us, your employer employs Singaporean male, he has up to 40 days of national service liability in a year.
But
if I employ a foreign male, I don't have this problem.
But they will argue that Singapore is full employment anyway, and that there is because
That is a myth, right? You know, you say, oh, the unemployment rate is always very low, and they will tell you, okay, the overall unemployment rate is always very low, right? And then the residents' unemployment rate, which means citizens and PRs, is higher, and then the citizens' unemployment rate is always the highest. But that is actually even worse, because what is the definition of unemployment rate? Number of citizens unemployed divided by the number of citizens in the total workforce. Now, every year on the average, we grant about 20,000 new citizens. And so the new citizens who are working actually add to the number at the bottom where you derive the unemployment rate. So the unemployment rate, right, is the unemployment rate of all citizens unemployed plus, you know, divided by the what we call the true blue citizens plus the new citizens. So if there is such a thing called what is the real unemployment rate for true blue Singaporeans, it's going to be much higher.
Why do you feel that disclosure of the wages of Temasek CEO in this struggle for transparency, why should that be so important?
Temasek is a sovereign wealth fund. So they're investing Singaporeans' taxpayers' money, right? Shouldn't there be at least basic transparency as to tell you how much the CEO's remuneration is? Well, if you look at the developed countries' sovereign wealth funds, they disclose the remuneration of their CEO, right?
And this remains a very tricky issue in Singapore.
No, I don't think there's any trick about it, right? I mean, if you are the sovereign wealth fund of a country and you are a developed country, I see no reason why the CEO's pay has to remain a secret.
You have traveled around the world and you know what is possible, you know how rich Singapore is, but we are still a far distance from Swiss living standard. Do you think that would be possible?
It's very easy because we have the highest reserves per capita in the world. We are ranked by the IMF almost always as in the top 5 of the richest country in the world in terms of the per capita income after adjusting for purchasing power parity. So the numbers are already there. The problem is one of distribution. Our inequality index ranking is 149 in the world. So the slogan is quite simple. Stop making money on CPF, HDB and healthcare. And gradually, all the mess that the government has created affecting Singaporeans, particularly as you put it, the squeeze middle class and the bottom will slowly go away.
Now, on that positive note, I wish you all the best.